Major League Baseball spring training is hosted every single February and March in both Arizona and Florida. Teams will play approximately 30 games each spring as a member of either Arizona's Cactus League or Florida's Grapefruit League.
No, all in my mind. No, it's all in my mind. No, all in my mind.
During this time, MLB clubs are generally housed in the state closest to their home city, with some exceptions primarily in the Midwest. It wasn't always this way, however. For the better part of the early 20th century, it was common for teams to change their spring training location every few years. It wasn't until the late 1950s to early 60s that teams established themselves in either Arizona or Florida. It also wasn't until the mid-2000s that the Grapefruit League and Cactus League had an equal number of teams. Modern baseball features 15 MLB clubs in both Arizona and Florida, but there are some differences between the Grapefruit and Cactus setup. The most notable is the proximity of teams. If you look at a map of Cactus League ballparks, all of them are in an extremely close radius. Each venue is based in Greater Phoenix, all within about 25 miles from the city center. Meanwhile, in the Grapefruit League, spring complexes stretch across the east and west coast of the state of Florida. Some ballparks are close to one another, but it's a little bit more difficult to navigate the whole league. This has led to the Grapefruit League schedule looking a little different than the Cactus League, as teams on the Atlantic Coast and Gulf Coast will mainly play each other. There will be some occasional crossover, but this line down the length of Florida isn't crossed very often between teams. There are 23 spring training stadiums between 30 MLB teams, and this is because 7 spring training ballparks house 2 teams. This is a little more common in the Cactus League, as 5 of the 10 parks in Arizona are shared. The Cactus League saw a big spike in new venue construction from 2003 to 2014, putting up 5 new facilities in a 12-year span, but the Grapefruit League has seen a jump since 2012, with 3 new complexes in a comparable time frame. One major difference between the leagues, however, is that Cactus League ballparks feature a bigger seating capacity than almost all of the Grapefruit League venues. This could be a product of the ballparks in Arizona being so close to each other, and it's a little easier to plan a baseball-specific trip to Phoenix than a similar itinerary across the entire state of Florida. Spring training complexes are far more than just the stadium field itself. It's important to remember that all professional players in an organization, both big leaguers and minor leaguers, are housed at the spring training site. This means there is a big need for fields, clubhouse facilities, training spaces, and more. When 2 teams share a complex, this can mean their venue takes up plenty of space. Some venues are able to house these resources all at one location, while some other teams may have a second complex off-site with comparable amenities. It's also common for some spring training stadiums to match the field dimensions of the big league teams they house. This is exactly the case for JetBlue Park, matching Fenway Park in Boston. The Chicago Cubs Sloan Park is a near identical match to Wrigley Field, with a slightly bigger outfield which can help normalize against Arizona elevation. Most shared venues have symmetrical or near symmetrical dimensions, but if the stadium itself doesn't match a big league stadium, it's pretty common for some of the backfields at a certain facility to match the big league fences.
So here's to life.
For the spring training schedule itself, report times for players will take place well before the first spring game of the year, but once games begin, teams can expect to play about 30 games in 30 days. It's common for every team to play a different opponent every day, which is unlike the regular season where teams will play a multi-game series against the same team over several days. Travel is far more convenient in the spring with closer proximity between teams, so players and coaches can expect to sleep in the same city pretty much every single day through the spring. Some days will feature a split squad schedule, which is one interesting bit of the Cactus and Grapefruit slate. Sometimes these games will happen at the exact same time, too. There we have the history, the venues, the schedule. Now all we need is the calendar to turn to late February for these games to commence. Spring training is a warmer time for many, a destination for all baseball minds, and a celebrated time on the calendar that shows baseball is back.
So give it all.